awareness campaign to unite investment professionals in a commitment to place investors' interest above all others. The CFA is a global association of investment professionals that sets the standard for professional excellence. And to talk about this, we are joined in the studio by Philip Bradford, who is a board member of the CFA. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Colin.
All right, let's talk about the latest notion of keeping the interest of investors first. How are their interests protected?
Well, first of all, the notion that we need to protect investors' interests is one I think most people would be a bit shocked by. We've got legislation coming through in South Africa now called treating customers fairly. You would have thought that would have been par for the course. But a lot of people realized, particularly post the financial crisis, that there were a lot of, the financial industry is one where you have a lot of power over your underlying customers. You have a lot more knowledge than they do, and they weren't necessarily behaving ethically. And this whole system is built on trust. Everything from the banking to the investment management industry is built on the trust of the investors. And if they don't have trust in that system, that can break down. And the consequences of something like that we saw post the last financial crisis in the 1930s, when the global system broke down. People stopped putting money in their banks, they started putting money under their mattresses, and the whole global financial system shut down. Mm-hmm. So from the CFA Institute, and we represent nearly 130,000 investment professionals globally, who typically are the top people in the industry, who have been through rigorous qualifications, who are looking to drive the best behavior in the industry. We were trying to influence the system from the inside out. We're always trying to make sure that our members behave ethically, professionally. But then we realized, though, that we needed to influence the system in a different way. You spoke a little bit earlier about industry bodies that are regulating themselves. Those are effectively the companies that decide what the rules will be. However, the CFA Institute are people represented in their personal capacity who are looking for the best in the industry.
Now, let's talk about that trust which was broken. How easy is it for it to be restored? I mean, I would believe that most investors are saying once bitten, twice shy. So why should I trust financial advisors?
Definitely. I mean, we did a survey, a global market sentiment survey of our members globally very recently, and 63% of them felt, and they are industry professionals, felt that it was unethical behavior in the industry that was causing the mistrust. So this is something that has to be won back very slowly, and you've got to start from the inside out. If you just put regulations in place, unfortunately what happens is those result in higher costs, and the people that are good at getting around the regulations continue to behave that way. So what you really need to do is you need to educate the investors, which hasn't really been done in the past. You need to educate, obviously, the professionals to make sure they're acting as professionals. And you need to assist the regulators. So we're engaging with regulators both locally and globally, and we're trying to assist to make sure that we get the industry right from the inside out. And just creating fences and rules doesn't necessarily solve the actual problems that we're dealing with.
Notwithstanding the endeavor to actually get things right from inside out, but then there is a process of shadow banking, and many people don't understand how it works. Can you briefly take us through the paces? Well,
this is a good example of an industry that exists where effectively the job it's the job of a bank to lend someone money, and they're governed by the Reserve Bank. And globally, what we saw pre the financial crisis was there were a lot of institutions that were starting to act like banks. Some in a good way and some in a not so good way. African Bank was a good example where they were raising money from non-traditional banking ways, in other ways from other banks or asset managers, and that didn't serve them too well in the end. They weren't getting money from depositors. What we're seeing now, though, is a number of other areas are potentially quite good in the shadow banking space. So effectively, shadow banks are other entities that lend money, raise money and lend money to other people that don't fall under the normal banking area. And one of the areas that we've picked up in the studies that we've done globally is that particularly microfinance in emerging economies can be a very positive shadow banking sector. So we've got a huge amount of people in South Africa that don't have access to finance from banks. Banks are unfortunately at the same time facing tougher regulations. It's harder for them to lend money. It's more expensive for them to lend money. So we need to facilitate other ways that allow people to access money.
You know, Philip, my time is up, and actually I wanted to ask you this question, and please, just very briefly, when we talk about shadow banking, some people are so vulnerable to getting loans from institutions that are not banks. We had loan sharks before, but then we have other institutions that have details of customers out there. Even if when you're not credit worthy, you qualify for a loan of about 150,000 rand in a month. How is this going to be regulated now that you are trying to restore the trust of financial management?
Well, this is so important. I mean, there's so many areas out there that are lending money to people unscrupulously. And we need to make sure that we can bring that into the net without necessarily making them banks. Because if you make them banks, it's not going to happen. They're not going to get those loans. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be a balance. And it's so important in an emerging economy like ourselves that we don't go and apply rules that apply to Europe or America in South Africa here, and that the industry actually helps get that framework in place so that we continue to let the economy improve.
All right. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
All right. Philip Bradford is a board member of the Chartered Financial Analysts, talking to us right here on PM News. And there's so much to talk about and so